Is violence a function of race? Some people have claimed that it must be because rates of homicide and suicide vary a great deal according to the so-called race of the group involved. Now, I want to suggest that the concept of race itself, I want to put quotes around it and consider it a problematic concept. How much is it biological? How much is it a social construct? I'm going to suggest that rather than talking about race, it's more useful to talk about social caste, similar to the way India has castes, where people are just born into a particular social role. Except when we talk about race, it's identified not by occupation, as caste in India is, but by skin color. I want to suggest that it's easy to show that race is not what determines violence rates. For example, if you compare native Europeans with European Americans, or so-called whites, what you find is, as I already mentioned, huge differences in rates of violence. Native Europeans commit homicide, as I said, at 1/10 the rate, or sometimes less than a tenth of the rate that the people from the same biological, supposedly belonging to the same biological race, commit homicide in the United States. And similar factors can be said about African Americans and Native Africans. There are studies showing that in Native African cultures, a number have been studied that have lower rates of both homicide and suicide than African Americans in the US do, and even lower than many white groups in the United States, like in the American South. So I'm going to say race is not really a cause. How about individual heredity? In the US, there was a popular play and movie some years ago called The Bad Seed, about a little girl who supposedly had inherited a homicidal impulse that led her to murder people. And it made a fascinating play and movie, but is totally mythological. But not totally. Let me mention. Terry Moffat and others have been doing work with about 1,000 individuals from early infancy to adulthood in Dunedin, New Zealand, and studying all kinds of outcome measures. One thing they found was that they could identify one genetic mutation which did appear to make people predisposed to violence as adults. But the genetic mutation only had that effect if the individual also had been subjected to severe child abuse. For those who had that mutation and had not experienced child abuse, they were actually less violent than people without the mutation. So it's clear that whatever hereditary predisposition there may be only gets activated if the social environment provides the stimulus to do that. Let me mention age and sex. Those are biological variables, and they are very powerful determinants of violence. There's very little of either homicide or suicide before puberty. Suddenly, rates of both increase dramatically, much more in males than females, for reasons I'll get into. But the highest rates of committing murder occur in almost every country around the world between roughly puberty, say age 15 or so, through young adulthood, age 29, maybe 34, but in other words, in that range are the highest rates of homicide. And then the rates go down and down and down and become negligible again by old age. Suicide's very different. In many groups, suicide, of course, it first becomes a problem after puberty, but then it just increases. So instead of diminishing like homicide does, it increases with age. And why is it that males are the main perpetrators of serious injury-producing lethal violence? There is a biological component. I'm going to suggest there are even more powerful social and psychological ones. But I think there is one biological reason, at least, why males are more violent than females. And that is that male sex hormones have been shown to predispose people, predispose the males of essentially all mammalian species to violence, and female sex hormones to inhibit it under most circumstances. There are some minor exceptions, but basically that works. Or to look at human beings, if you look at the rate of circulating testosterone in the bloodstream from birth to death and old age, and you look at the murder rate from birth to death, what you find is these two rates basically parallel each other. Testosterone goes up, the murder rate goes up. It really starts, as you know, at puberty, and then hits a peak and plateaus, and then it starts coming down along with the murder rate. So there's a lot of evidence that that is at least one factor that, in conjunction with social and psychological factors, leads to more violence on the part of men rather than women. And that means both homicide and suicide. Men commit homicides in most countries, say on the order of 9 times more often than women do, commit suicide. In the US, men commit suicide 4 times as often as women do. Women make more suicide attempts or suicidal gestures, but those are more often interpreted actually as attempts to reach out to people and get a relationship, a helping relationship. In that respect, you could say women are healthier than men mentally. That and many other reasons you would say that.